Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of OTH Sports View. I'm JP Butler alongside Sean Campbell. Today we have a Big 30 football edition of the show, and 2 weeks ago we had what they were calling Week 0 in Pennsylvania. It was only our Pennsylvania teams who were in action that weekend. We had 6 games, they were all blowouts. There wasn't a whole lot to talk about from that weekend. Fast forward to this past Friday and Saturday. Really the first official week in the Big 30 because it was all our teams in both New York and Pennsylvania in action, and really a much better offering in terms of games. Yeah, there were still a lot of blowouts. In fact, 14 of our 22 teams were involved in games that were decided by 3 touchdowns or more. But still, we did have a couple of interesting games. Highlighted the one that you covered on Friday night in Allegany-Limestone. This was a game that was probably, maybe will go down as the most anticipated game of the regular season this year, and it was right in Week 1 with Olean High and Allegany-Limestone. And it was kind of anticipated for a couple of reasons. The proximity, I think, the fact that you have 2 teams right in our backyard who had never played each other before. This was the first meeting between the 2 teams. The fact that it was a Olean team in a Class B versus an Allegany-Limestone and C, what kind of dynamic that would create. The fact that you had Phil Vecchio in his first game as the Olean High coach, replacing longtime mentor Mike Kane. All those factors kind of seemed to come together in that game. We weren't really sure to expect, and ended up being one of our close games over the weekend. A 13-7 final in favor of the Huskies. Sean, you were there. What was kind of, how did that go, and what was kind of the difference in that game that Olean was able to come out on top?
Well, it was a competitive game, and I think we were all kind of wondering exactly how that would play out with all of the dynamics that you talked about. Olean, it was kind of a tale of 2 halves, I guess you could say. The first half, Allegany-Limestone was running the ball pretty well. Took a 6-0 lead on kind of an odd sequence of events. They drove down to Olean's 2-yard line, throw an interception. Then Olean's first play after the pick, fumbles the ball. AL recovers in the end zone for a touchdown. It's the only scoring in the first half. So things are looking pretty good for Allegany-Limestone.
You had to be pretty happy at that point to be ahead on a team like that, I would think.
And then the second half, just Olean took over to some extent.
Right.
Got some things going on offense after kind of a slow start. Some big passes from Garrett Bolt, one for a touchdown, and their defense didn't allow a first down in the second half. Really kind of slowed down Allegany-Limestone's running game, and the offense controlled the clock too and kept Allegany-Limestone off the field.
And that's kind of the point I wanted to touch on. The defense was obviously great in the second half to not allow another Allegany-Limestone score. But we had a couple of guys. We have guys out every weekend watching games for us. We come together at the end of the year to pick the Big 30 team. A couple of guys came forward to me to say that one of the big differences seemed to be Olean's backs. Like you said, they were able to just kind of control the clock, control the game. And we know that they've got a talented athlete at quarterback in Garrett Bolt. We know that they have a big back in Dylan Vincent. How much did those guys have to do with just kind of being able to, maintain that lead down the end of the game?
I think they were big. They kind of just, after they scored a touchdown on their first drive of the second half, kicked the extra point to take the lead. Then after that, they kind of just grinded it out. They had 3 backs who had over 40 yards, Garrett Bolt, Dylan Vincent, and then Maurice Gayton, who had really a huge run late in the 4th quarter on a 3rd down play, like a 28-yard run to give them a first down, keep the clock rolling, and that was really a big difference.
An unsung
yeah,
player.
it kind of kept the ball in Olean's hands, and they were able to kind of just run the clock down for the most part.
Right. So we think that this is an Allegany-Limestone team that had a bounce back year last year and could be pretty good again this year. They've got a lot of bigger kids back. They've got one of the better players in the Big 30 back, I think, in Marcus Grove, who definitely made his presence felt in this game by the sounds of it. And so, could be in a position, you hang with a team like Olean High to be pretty good again this year. What do you think now, for Olean High going forward? It was maybe not the cleanest win, but it was still a win. Still 1-0 start for this team going forward, who, hasn't been in the playoff, picture at the end of the season in a lot of recent years. What do you kind of maybe expect from them going forward after a win like this?
Well, I think for Olean and Allegany-Limestone, I mean, sure they would have liked to have won this week one game,
Right.
but both coaches made a point of saying it was just a non-league game. They kind of get a feel for where you are, build off that. Something that's going to be interesting for Olean is they haven't won a league game since 2014. They went winless last year, and that Class B South League's always very good top to bottom, so that could be a challenge. And with a roster that's only in the low 20s, they lose a two-way starter this past week, Luke Chapman, late in the second quarter.
Yeah, that's a big thing that we didn't really get into.
So it's going to be interesting to see how they handle that, if they encounter more injuries, if that could kind of snowball.
Right.
They also had a couple of linemen who weren't eligible for the opener. I think they missed some early practices, just didn't have enough practices in for that point, so they may factor in as we move forward here too.
So certainly some extra help, but also, like we said, because they do have such a short roster to begin with, that maybe they certainly can't afford another major injury like what we saw with Luke Chapman. That's an unfortunate situation, certainly a season ender from what we've heard, and maybe something that even keeps him out for the rest of the school year, which would be unfortunate. But again, a win for the Huskies, something that they'll certainly take in week one. Phil Vecchio wins his debut. Now they at least have some momentum going forward. A couple of other things, exciting things in the Big 30 from last weekend. We had our first overtime game of the season with Coudersport beating Bradford High, which was an interesting thing because that was a team from the AML North beating a team from the South, which has been such a rarity. We know the teams from the South have been dominating those teams from the North. But not only that, the fact that it was Bradford that was beaten, and this is the team that, again, we talked about being a Class Quad A school coming into a league with mostly Class A teams, were they just going to basically be able to roll over everybody just because of that? And we thought after week one they end up beating Smethport by 3 scores, that maybe they'll be just like the rest of the South, but then they follow that up by losing to Coudersport, so that's kind of an interesting thing to see. What else stood out to you from last weekend, which again was probably really our first kind of official week of the season?
I don't know if it's a big surprise, but our teams that were good last year look to be pretty good again. I mean, Franklinville-Ellicottville, 35-8 win over Clymer-Sherman Panama. They have a lot of guys back from that team that won a sectional title last year. A new quarterback, though, Brock Bleacha, who sounds like he got off to a pretty good start in the opener.
And that's another good athlete in the Big 30, and I think
multiple sports.
Right. And we talked about Cuba Rushford too, being another team that we thought would probably be pretty good just because of what they had back, and being in a league where, again, there's probably a lot of opportunities for wins there, and looks like that's the kind of start they've gotten off to.
Yeah, I mean, winning by over 3 touchdowns against Perry. They lose Big 30 Player of the Year in Jake Jones, but I mean, you wouldn't have really known it. It sounds like just the way they get off to a strong start.
Right.
Trevor Smith, just running really well. They had 3 linemen back from that team who blocked for Jones, so that's probably a nice core to have.
Right, and that's the thing. We thought coming into this year, and Cuba Rushford did that despite losing Jones. Any time you lose a guy of that caliber, you think, oh, we might be in a little bit of trouble next year. But they never really felt that because they had the core of their line back, which is really one of the better lines in the Big 30, and a guy that they thought could step in and now be their next workhorse, maybe their next star. And if week one is any indication, that's kind of what that might be. Trevor Smith was Jones's backup last year. He did get some carries and had some moments, but really it was the Jake Jones show. Now it might be the Trevor Smith show. He had 193 rushing yards and 5 touchdowns. One of those came on a punt return, on a muffed punt that he scooped up and took in 20 yards for a score. But, you know, again, that's pretty eye-popping numbers. That's what we had seen out of Jones all last year, and this was basically that same kind of line again this week, 193 yards, 5 touchdowns. What do you make of the Coudersport and Bradford situation, just because so many eyes are on the fact that Bradford's in this league, and maybe some people are even kind of questioning why a team like that would be, you know, just because of the class level, would be allowed into that league. But they were, you know, they were beaten by a team from the north early in the season.
Yeah, I mean, I was surprised, like a lot of people were, and I think just mainly because I saw them the week before against Smethport,
right.
and they'd won 41-6. I mean, they looked like a South team against a North team. But I mean, maybe that speaks something about Coudersport too. We predicted them to win the North this year,
right.
and maybe they are capable of doing something like that too.
Right. We thought if there was a team from the North who would be able to be competitive with the South this year, who would maybe come out on top in that part of the league, that it would be Coudersport. They seem to have the most back. They seem to have a pretty good coach in Ben Carey. They have a Big 30 All-Star back in that Wolfinger, Aaron Wolfinger, who's their quarterback and does a lot for them. So maybe this won't be the only time that a team from, you know, that Coudersport's able to hang with a team from the South. But still, that dynamic does exist, because the rest of the game, the other 5 games in the AML, that was an average 5 wins from the South and an average score of 49-7. So again, we're still kind of seeing that disparity.
Yeah. The thing with Bradford too, I mean, just imagine if this Coudersport game would have been Bradford's first game. I mean, after they beat Smethport pretty handily, I think we thought we had a kind of a better idea of just how things might go for Bradford in the AML, and now it's kind of back to square one, and just in terms of not exactly knowing,
wondering what are they going to be. So that was kind of an interesting dynamic. We had a couple of other close games. It maybe wasn't the most exciting game, but Salamanca loses on a last-second field goal to Cassadaga Valley Faulkner. You know, one of our fringe teams, St. Mary's, wins by a point. We had some surprises in there. I think Randolph, anytime you talk about Randolph, you're thinking that they're probably going to be pretty good and maybe at the top of that Class D league. This is a team that won 3 straight state championships from 12 to 14, and even last year won 5-2 in the regular season. And so you get to the point where you don't even think they're capable of a down year, and they fall in week 1, 26-7 to Silver Creek. Mm-hmm. So, you know, that Class D league is that's going to be interesting, knowing that Maple Grove is what they are. Franklinville, Elkiville, we talked about. Now, if Silver Creek is handling Randolph, that seems to be like it's going to be pretty loaded at the top.
Yeah, I mean, if you're talking about a league where Randolph could finish 3rd and still be pretty good, that 3rd or 4th maybe, that's a pretty good league. And I mean, Silver Creek last year, they were a Class C school, and they dropped down to Class D this year, and I think they showed week 1 that they're going to be a factor in this league too.
Certainly. And so, as we said, we've got some teams who are doing very well in the early going. We have some teams that it'll still be interesting to see what they do going forward. And 2 of the teams coming back to the beginning, Olean and Allegany-Limestone. Allegany-Limestone in week 2 here, coming up in a few days, gets their first league game, a shot at Southwestern, which they lost to last year as part of a 4-1 start. And they've lost to them the last couple of years, so I know they've had this game circled as a team they want to try to show that they can beat. Olean High gets its first league game against Dunkirk, and that was the game they dropped, I think maybe the last 2.
Last year.
And so certainly a lot of eyes will be on those games going forward. And we'll be back next week to talk about those games and the rest of the week 2 action in the Big 30. That'll do it for this one. I'm JP Butler, Sean Campbell. Thanks for watching.